All right, so I'm admitting to you, because I'm not that proud, that I'm having problems provisioning. And so you have an assignment. It's not an official one, but it's sort of a contest. And I'll have to figure out what to give the person who figures it out. But I went in and Googled provisioning Macs for Apple iOS University program. We have to make sure that next week when we start that everybody's able, we'll have a simple program and make sure it runs on everybody's machine. All right. And when I say a simple program, I mean a simple graphical program, because if we can get all the non-graphical ones we want to run, but I want to start doing graphical stuff virtually right away. All right. So that's first thing. Let's jump back into here. Class extensions. This is only a couple pages long. All right. It says, so far you've declared all your properties, instance variables, and methods in the class header file. The header file is where the class advertises its properties and methods so that other classes know how to interact with it. However, not every property or method should be advertised in the class's header. Some properties or methods are only intended for use by the class or instance of the class. Those are known as class extensions. Bottom line is this. Sometimes, and you don't know this until you start working with it, but sometimes you don't have to give as much, for lack of better words, information. A class extensions is a set of declarations that's private. Only the class or instances of the class are able to access its properties, instance variables, etc. So you know this when we talked about things like hierarchies, and when we talked about things like access modifiers, and we talked about public, private, protected, etc. This falls more on the protected side. It says here, for example, the office alarm code property of the employee should be private. Now that should make sense. You wouldn't want to be sharing that with other people. All right. So the employee object needs to be able to access its alarm code, but non-employee objects shouldn't even know that basically that it exists. There's no reason for them to. It says you can make this happen by moving the declaration of the office alarm code from the employee to a class extension. So it's going to be in its own area, however you want to call it. Typically, class extensions, and please look up here, as it says, typically class extensions are added to the implementation file above the implementation block. So that's where, what they're saying is, okay, there's your implementation block for employees, so you'd be adding this up there. So in essence, what you're saying is that's private to that class. There's no reason for anyone else to know about it. All right. But it is possible if you had left it, instead of putting it here, if you had left it inside of the BNR employee.h header file, that other classes could have accessed it. Now they can't. All right. Also notice that a class extension starts with interface, not with implementation. It starts with interface. What else starts with interface? .h. Because that's what you're basically doing, is you're kind of creating a mini .h inside of here. All right. Okay. So they show you pulling it out of here, and they already showed you where you should put it into. It says, now let's look at a slightly different case for putting a declaration in a class extension instead of in a class's header. In the employee, you declared an assets property that's an NS array and an add assets. Well, we didn't really look at that, all right? It says a variable that's a mutable array. Again, I do want to make sure you all understand this, and I did mention this to you before. A mutable array means that you can add things to the array as the program's running. You can remove things from the program while the program's running. If it's an NS array, you set it up basically at compile time, where if it's a mutable array, you set it up at runtime. All right. It says, now that you know a developer will see both the property and the instance variable in the header. It says, now that you know this, what you can do is you can take the assets instance variable, and you can move it to a class extension. Again, up here, just like we just talked about. Okay. Right there. So now again, that's available basically from here on down, and it's unknown anyplace else. And that's all they're trying to talk about in here. All right, like I said, this is a fairly short chapter. A subclass has no access to its superclass's class extensions. BNR employee is a subclass of BNR person and imports its header file. Thus, BNR employee knows about what is declared in the person's header file, but it knows nothing about that person, what that person may have declared in a class extension. Okay? So it doesn't have direct access to it. It's very similar to it being private. All right. Finally, when a class declares a property in its header, only the accessors are visible to other objects. Non-employee objects cannot directly access it, which should make sense. They have to access it through. So if you've got anything that inherits from there, they've got to do it through the parent. That's all they're saying. Again, it's very similar to stuff that we've talked about in Java and in other languages. I'm going to stop this one here. We'll pick it up later at preventing the memory leaks. All right, and I'm going to quickly just jump into here and just mention a couple things because there's a lot of duplication in here. All right, they talk about building with Xcode, and the author comes in and he goes through and he talks about what some of the different things in here are and a command line tool as opposed to building a non-command line tool, etc. All right, that's not that big a thing. You may or may not be aware of this, but if you have not tried this before, all right, if you have not tried this, the next time that you're in Xcode, take your mouse and just put it over one of the things that's in Xcode. Just pick out anything. Pick out something on the menu or something up on top here, and hold down on your control key and click the mouse button. That's supposed to bring you up a little shortened version of help for that particular thing. All right, it's called something like a media help, or I don't remember the exact name for it. Okay. Hopefully you know this too by now, that when you are working in Xcode, it's configurable. You could drag stuff, and I don't care what you do on here. If you want to drag, if you want to drag what's normally on the right side and put it on the left, or the left side and put it on the right, or vice versa, it doesn't matter. You can do almost anything you want to do with it. All right. Now they mentioned a couple things that are in here. This is all stuff that we're going to get into, but if you look up on the screen here, they're saying that when you start to build the project, there's a lot of stuff that gets built for you. All right, as they mentioned here, it says when you select this, a list of items appears in the detail pane. All right, looking at these items in order. Foundation framework, well, we've already talked about this. All right, the UI kit framework is the one for the GUI classes. The foundation framework is the one for the non-GUI classes. So foundation is Cocoa, UI kit is Cocoa Touch. Okay. Hello Objective-C is your finished project. When you first create it, it's shown in red. And it's shown in red because it hasn't been created yet. All right? And we'll get into this and we'll talk a little bit about this as far as setting up and basically having versioning and stuff for your programs. We'll start to get into that hopefully next week. This file right here, Bob, you should like this. Because it says that since you chose that you wanted to create a manual, you wanted to basically do a manual type of file, it thinks you might be creating a new Unix tool. So that file is going to hold your manual page. Typically, you won't even touch that. The .m file we've already talked about. All right. An Objective-C file for your program with a skeleton with a main routine. Okay. And this, the name of the file, underscore prefix.pch. PCH, as it says, is a precompiled header file, something that makes the compiler more efficient. Look at it this way. All those imports, it kind of stuffs together and it says, oh, we ought to do all these first. So it's trying to do things to optimize the run. Okay? All right. Now, it says double-click hello Objective-C.main. If we ran this right now, this should make sense to all of you looking at this. Okay? That it's going to do an NSLog, so it's going to write hello world. That's all you have to do for a hello world. And typically that's set up for you automatically anyway, so it's no big thing. There's the code. Now, this book is a little old, so notice we've got here the pool and the pool drain. That's not how yours is going to look, because ours automatically has ARC encoded into it. All right? So ours will just have the NO auto release pool here basically and a curly brace, not much else. And then we'll have the ending curly brace at the bottom. But here in the old-fashioned way, you had to create it, allocate it, and then drain it when you were done. You had to basically make the calls to do that. And that's explained in here. So if you don't like my explanation, it runs everything and shows you everything that's in here. All right. So they have you write that one, which is a simple object, or hello world. And then the author says, that's not enough. So let's create an object-oriented hello world. So that's the second one that he has you do. So what you do is you come in there and you add a class. Okay? So as it says, you do a file, new file, and you come through there. You select Cocoa class under the Mac OS X. You click the Objective-C class icon. It's not exactly that way because, again, this book is a little older, but it's going to create the class for you. You're going to go through the same kind of thing. They want you to create a class that's called selecting this object, click next. Cocoa, I don't remember. I guess, it's greeter. There it is. Okay, and it's going to be inside of your Hello Objective-C. And since you're creating that and it's a new class, it'll automatically create the greeter.m and the greeter.h for you. All right. And that's where you're going to come in and start adding some code. All right, such as, well, let's look at greeter.h. Okay, there really and truly shouldn't be anything that's in there that you now don't know how to use and what it is. Now notice they have not used a property in there. On line 5, they're actually creating in there an instance variable that's got the greeting text in it. So there's not a property because they haven't gotten to that point yet in this book. All right, and we have 3 instance methods. All right, 2 return nothing, 1 returns a string. All right, and that string, as it says, it's basically going to be that greeting text. Okay, and so again, that will be our getter. Here's our setter, and it's called set greeting text : All right, we're going to have to pass in new text, which is basically a pointer to a string. All right. And then we're going to have issue greeting, which is literally just going to be like an NS log or something like that. Now they go through there and they explain every single line of this. But my hope is that anything that wasn't in here, like they talk about how you have to start it with interface, how it should, always inherit from another class. We've gone through that stuff, so I'm not going to read that to you. So that stuff's all in there. Okay. And everything that's in here as far as syntax for the set and the get, it's all shown in here. What I liked about this book is, to me, the only reason I'm showing you 2 books is not to confuse you, but I think that the Hillegass book, I think it's a good book, but I think it's kind of sketchy sometimes when it mentions things. This book doesn't have nearly the breadth of code examples, but the explanations and of the syntax, I think, is much stronger. That's why I'm combining the 2. So here's the greeter.m. Okay. And when we look in here, again, the import, etc., but this is the whole thing, so there's not a lot in here. Again, where you see this stuff, the retain and release, we don't have to worry about that anymore, okay, because we're using arc, so just pretend it's not there. But again, return greeting text, what is that? Well, that's our getter. We've already talked about that. Issue greeting text, that's just a log. And what are we calling there? We're saying, hey, take the current object, which remember in here is self, and call greeting text. All right? I'm sorry. Okay. What this says is, basically, give me, for the self objects, give me the greeting text. So whatever we put in there. And when they do this, they basically they'll set it up so it'll say hello world by default, but you can also pass it something. Does that make sense? All right, because you probably wouldn't want it to say hello world every time. So they explain each one of these. Again, greeting text is a simple method. It returns the pointer to the string. I think I mentioned that. Set it has some new things. It takes an argument, a pointer to a string that holds the greeting text we want greeter to remember. Again, the colon is part of the name. We've talked about that already. All right. Then they go through, if you didn't like my explanation or you didn't think it was complete enough, they explain on the rest of this page, all this stuff I put in blue, they explain both the syntax of calling a method right there, and they explain the retain and release. Again, this stuff has basically all been replaced by the use of ARC, the automatic reference counting. It's basically all been replaced for you. All right? And the chapter I didn't go through in the other book, I stopped on 22, but 23 was on memory leaks. And memory leaks are the main reason that ARC was put in there, and it was put in there as a default. So you didn't have to worry about possibly introducing memory leaks. Issue greeting, as it says. It's the method that delivers the greeting. What greeting? Whatever greeting, it'll have hello world by default, but you can also pass it something. Okay? Now, this is important. Even with ARC, this is important because sometimes you're not going to use ARC. You might still want to manually keep track of objects and how many references it has to it. Okay? You may or may not remember this, but we talked about the fact, all right, Java, you create a new class. What do you call in Java to create a new class? Come on, somebody. When you create a new class in Java, all right, what gets called? Remember the constructor? All right. And one thing we talked about in Java, but we didn't spend much time on it, Java not only has a constructor, it has a destructor. Usually you don't call the destructor in Java because you don't have control over when the destructor is actually called. All right? Even if you say you can't call it directly. Okay? So typically in Java you use a finalize method where you do all your housekeeping, you close file connections, you close database connections, etc. The point is that if you are doing any manually taking care of objects and their count, you will have a deallocate or dealloc method, where, as it says, when the reference drops to 0, there's something that you might want to do. So if you are working on a project with other people, what you might find is, if you own that object, all right, and other people are using it, it might be more complex than what we've looked at thus far, is what I'm saying. And you might have to write your own dealloc routine. All right, so this is the program they write for the Objective-C. Again, this is the equivalent of setting a default right there. So it says hello Objective-C. All right. Then when they come in, they run it, and that's what it says. All right, but it might be in the next chapter. I don't remember. They go in and they have it set up so if you want to, you could change that message, and you can run it and have it say, hello Bob. All right. So that was quick. Okay, but I thought there was a tie-in between what we've gone through so far, and that's the end of part 1 in that book. So as we go through this, I'll bounce back and forth between the two books, and notice what's in part 2. As it says, part 2 of this book covers the Objective-C language in detail. I don't think our Hillegass book covers Objective-C in much detail at all. All right. So again, I will go back and forth between the two. So last thing, I said it before, I'm saying it again. All right. Feel free that if you can look up this or something else and find information that you think will help me next week, on Tuesday, get these Macs provisioned for everybody. If you think you got it now, just send it to me. Otherwise, bring it. All right? All right. But I'm going to be looking at it. I'm going to try to make sure mine is provisioned. I looked at a few things today, and like I said, what I can do, just so you know, what I can do with the Mac that I have, which is like yours, except it's an older one, so it's heavier and it's bigger, etc. But what I can do with mine is I can put in any program that's in this book, any one. But the programs that are in Chapter 31 and 32, which are the only programs in this book that are GUI, I can run it, and it brings up the simulator, but it never, I've left it up for 10 minutes. It never shows me anything in it. And I'm figuring after 10 minutes, it ain't going to show me anything in it. All right? But I will keep working on that, and hopefully I can come up with something next week. I want us to start coding. I don't want to sit there and have to just keep talking.